Mother of two named Vicky Derderian needs a heart transplant. But she's being told by the health authorities there, no jab, no heart. Ugh. She said, patients like myself were being pushed into a corner and coerced to take something that goes against what we believe in or not receive life-saving treatment. And also for doctors as well, they're forced to implement this on their patients, otherwise they lose their jobs. She's worried about the risk of myocarditis or pericarditis as a result of taking the vaccine, given that she has heart failure and is in need of a heart transplant. And
we've lost all humanity.
Well, right. And then in addition to that, of course, the macro results continue to pour in. Mentioned it earlier in the week, the CDC survey on teen depression. And, the numbers...
37% of high school students, females, have thought about committing suicide.
More than 1 in 3. This is if you believe CDC numbers, which is always dangerous, but that's directionally where things are with the issues of despair and feelings of isolation and the disconnectedness. We've seen study after study that has documented the decline in academic performance, how much this pushed kids behind in their intellectual as well as social and emotional development.
Yeah, life experiences that they could never get back.
And so we are so pleased to be joined by our next guest because over the last 3 years, we've been proud and lucky to bring you people like Dr. Joseph Ladapo, Martin Kulldorff, Jay Bhattacharya. These are people who were courageous enough to stand up against the orthodoxy, not just for standing up to the orthodoxy's sake, but because they said, well, wait a second, what they're saying doesn't comport with what we understand, and they're not answering questions that need to be answered, and they're not keeping their promises about the sort of testing and studies that need to be conducted so we have more complete knowledge before we issue these mandates, and so on and so forth. Well, Dr. Joseph Ladapo went from UCLA to Florida, as many of you know, where he was tapped to be the Surgeon General there by Governor Ron DeSantis. That's where he is now. He's also the author of a new book, Transcend Fear, A Blueprint for Mindful Leadership in Public Health. Dr. Joseph Ladapo, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, guys. Happy to be chatting with you guys this morning.
Yeah, so, there's so much that has come out just in the last couple of weeks. What is the most disturbing to you? What should people be focusing on in this discussion of COVID when they're contemplating what to do next for themselves or their children?
Oh, man, that's a weighty one. Well, I was hearing you talk about these issues of the transplants, and this thing happens where bad things are happening, but they're in a corner and there's not a lot of light, and so they keep the people who are the purveyors of these things continue to get away with it. So, a great example, for example, is how the country's been forcing people to receive a COVID-19 vaccine to come into the country if they're not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Completely ludicrous, completely crazy, not effective at stopping spread. Like, why is anyone doing this? But they did it for a long, long time. And another corner is this transplant issue where folks are being coerced in a really terrible way. It's really more like a gun to the head to take a vaccine they don't want to receive an organ that will save their life. Not a lot of people who need transplants, so these issues stay in the dark. And I think frankly there's a lot of value and a lot of virtue in continuing to beat the drums of these very important. I mean, people talk about social justice. These are justice issues. These justice issues that just don't get a lot of light, that are in the corners.
Now, Pfizer was supposed to report data on myocarditis study by the end of December 2022, but that time has come and gone, and when are we going to know the facts?
Oh, Lord have mercy. So unfortunately, the FDA, there's I think a doctor and I don't know her, but she posts on Twitter, and she actually called out the FDA, and she got an email back from the FDA's communications office about the 6-month extension, because it's a completely real thing. There are 2 studies now, one from Thailand, another from I think Switzerland, that found extremely high rates of cardiac injury after mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. And what's an extremely high rate? They found rates of between 2 and 3 and 100. And that's just crazy. That is abnormal. That's pathological. It's not good. It's quite bad. And Pfizer, we should have already known in larger studies how common this is. Pfizer had a deadline for having more myocarditis data. That was December 31st, 2022. And they got a 6-month extension. And the FDA, in their statement to this physician or researcher that she put out on Twitter, she's got the screenshot of the email, they say that Pfizer requested a 6-month extension that was granted. And of course, there's a word for that, and we abbreviate it with BS, because anyone who works in the industry or in government knows that it doesn't work like that. There was clearly some communication that, where Pfizer's saying what they want, the FDA is responding and asking questions. Well, why do you want this extension? What are you saying? It's a coordinated decision. And, one day we'll hopefully know the truth, but we don't know anything yet about why they're getting this extension on something that, by the way, takes like 2 weeks to study. And you could have the answers in 2 weeks.
Where are you right now in terms of recommending or not recommending the succession of boosters and for and whatever however you distinguish it among the various age cohorts and comorbidity cohorts? What are your recommendations?
We've come out very strongly against all of them, primary series and boosters for children, and all of them for young men. We've come out very strongly against that because there's strong data behind that. For the other age groups, so far we're doing some data analysis, and hopefully we'll be able to make some strong recommendations based on the results. My suspicion, as someone who has observed the data that we have so far, but again, it's not really rigorous in this respect yet, is that at this point in the pandemic, it's just cuckoo for anyone who doesn't have major risk factors and isn't older, and by older I mean at least 50, if not 65, to take any of these vaccines ever again. There's just the harm right now in terms of the virus is almost entirely concentrated based on our Florida data and people who were 65 or older. We're talking about 90% of deaths at least. And, these vaccines, they're very unsafe. They're just these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. People are trying to pretend like they're like other vaccines like flu, and that is a flat-out lie or a delusion. They are so much less safe than any other widely used vaccine.
What are your thoughts on Dr. Fauci and his role in all of this?
Well, Dr. Fauci, it's really funny because Dr. Fauci, he reminds me of the funny stories you hear about cockroaches surviving nuclear attacks, and that's what he is. He's always there, even when he's gone and retired, he's still there. And he's just unstoppable. Can't crush him. Can't push him aside. In some ways, I'm actually amused by him. He's because I suspect that he knows, he's very conscious of what he's doing in terms of how he has manipulated the public perception of everything from remdesivir's quote unquote effectiveness. I mean, it's not a highly effective medication at all for hospitalized patients, and the WHO, the World Health Organization, recommended against it in hospitalized patients. To the mask stuff, right? He's the guy that says people shouldn't use them in early 2020, and then he's saying you should wear 4 of them later on in the same year. So I'm actually quite bemused by him. He's sort of he actually brings some comic relief, I think, to the pandemic at this point. But lots of work to do to undo the damage that he has done.
Well, and also the admission just recently in a paper that he co-authored that he knew that the nature of these vaccines that would not prevent the spread. They would not prevent you from spreading or getting COVID again. He knew it, and yet he perpetrated this fraud that he had people rinsing and repeating that, you get the jab and then you don't get it or spread it.
Right. And I mean, it's funny because I know that people were that did get a good bit of attention. I gotta say with him, I don't know why anyone would believe anything he says, right? Like, because you don't know whether is he setting up the next move, the next stratagem that he's going to unleash, or is he covering? I mean, I don't take anything seriously that he says, and he has, like Dr. Walensky. You may have seen some excerpts. I saw some excerpts of Dr. Rochelle Walensky's testimony in front of Congress, and thank goodness someone's asking questions, for crying out loud. But she got asked about masks and masking 2-year-olds and why we were the only country, basically, that recommends doing that. And she was dancing and weaving and hopping and saying that she basically said that the randomized even though randomized controlled trials didn't show benefit, other studies did, so we should do it. And she clearly, she's well trained. She's obviously well educated. She actually was a professor at Harvard when I was there in my PhD program. But she clearly just has no grasp of epidemiological studies. I mean, they're just clear biases that these studies have, the ones she uses to support masks and to support the vaccines, actually, that are completely lost on her. So, for example, just say, yeah.
Well, the problem,
of
course, is, I mean, I know what you're saying with Fauci and Walensky, but, unfortunately, their viewpoints, however baseless and fact-free, get amplified by the media, and there's loads and loads of gullible people in this country, and they tend to have a very negative impact on elections and thus policies. So the problem is that Fauci and Walensky have an outsized impact on public health because of that dynamic.
Oh, you're absolutely right. They do. And I don't know. I mean, I think for me, part of keeping my sanity and clarity is just seeing things for what they are, if you will. And, Dr. Fauci, he really is this amusement. I mean, unfortunately, he absolutely has had a negative and continues to have a very negative impact on the pandemic. And you're right. People hang on, reporters will hang on literally his every word. But what is he really? I mean, he's like comedy. I mean, he just, 1 + 1 = 2 today, equals 3 tomorrow. Who knows what it's going to equal next week when it comes out of his mouth. And that's the truth. And I think the good part is that more people do wake up to that. But you're right. I mean, it's not easy to undo the damage that people like him and Dr. Walensky. Dr. Walensky is less comedic. She's more depressing, frankly, in my opinion. Yeah. But it takes work to undo it.
Yeah. I wonder, because there's this discussion that has been promulgated by the left, the COVIDian left, of, that's just amnesty, mistakes were made, let's just move on and, learn to love one another again and so forth. I wonder what your experience has been, because you're one of those public health professionals that received a lot of criticism for daring to question the orthodoxy, as I mentioned at the outset. And I wonder if any colleagues have come to you after the fact and said, Joe, I didn't agree with you. I thought you were wrong, but it turned out you were right about a lot of things, and I apologize. Some of the suggestions you made, the way that we approach these things, we have to do better next time. Have you had any conversations like that?
It's a great question. A few, not many. So really, people tend to fall into two categories. They've either been suspicious from the beginning, and those suspicions have only grown, or they were drinking the COVID Kool-Aid from the beginning, and now they don't like the taste anymore, but they're unwilling to face the truth and admit that they were part of that whole COVID mania. And so it's like, I think it's this amnesty BS of let's just pretend nothing bad happened and that nothing wrong happened, and let's move on. So I think, and you see that in life. I mean, it's not just COVID. A lot of times people are just, it's few people who are willing to really take ownership of when they made mistakes and to call themselves out. Most people don't want to do that. They just want to put it in the rearview mirror.
He is Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo. He's also the author of the new book, pick it up, Transcend Fear, a blueprint for mindful leadership in public health. Dr. Ladapo, thanks as always for joining us. Pleasure. Keep up the good work.
Lots of love to you guys. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of Nature's fruits and vegetables in a capsule. Changing the world, one life at a time.
Well, I drive a truck for a living. I don't get hardly any exercise. I'm not kidding you now. I'm not easily sold on anything, but I'm a firm believer in this product. I watched those advertisements for 2 or 3 years and listened to the radio going down the road, and I said, something's got to be going on with that.